Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere, and I'm the founder at Supply Chain Insights. And today I am interviewing Vineet. I met Vineet when he was at Nestle, but Vineet is going to share a little bit about what he would have told his 25-year-old self. So Vineet, tell the group a little bit about yourself, and then let's get into the topic at hand.
Laura, first of all, thanks for the opportunity, and it's great to be able to share something about myself, not for myself, but for the benefit of people who might gain something from that experience. So if you ask my early stage career, I graduated from a university in Delhi in India and went for my business school straight from the business school, straight from the college. And at that stage, I did not have very clear idea of what I will do, but my undergrad degree and the business degree was taking me to the direction of being a business manager, a business leader, which initially I thought I would be doing finance, but then over a period of time, my career evolved. The first thing I would say is that I think I should have done differently is to work before I did my business school. I did business school. It was a very good business school, very competitive to get into. But I realized that had I worked before that, I would have had much more practical understanding of how the organizations work. Because business is not just about the theory of what is good marketing or what is good supply chain. It's about how the organization units and how people work with each other, how the different parts of the organization interact with each other, which is very different from the theory that one reads in books or in business school. So that's first thing which comes to my mind, that what I would have done differently. But anyway, after the business school, I got into Nestle straight. I've had a great career in Nestle for 37 years. And maybe one thing I want to particularly emphasize is that I've had a very multifunctional career. So I spent 3 years in manufacturing, followed by 3 years in finance, then 3 years in the sales system, and then 3 years doing technology, which was the ERP implementation in those days. And those 12 years, which at that stage looked completely chaotic because there were 4 different functions altogether to me, suddenly fell in place when I did supply chain just after that. Because in supply chain, all the knowledge that I'd had in different functions and the perspective be very, very handy. And I knew how the end-to-end business operates and how the different parts connect with each other. So the multifunctional aspects of my career is something which stands out. And I'll tell more as the conversation progresses.
So how old were you when you heard the term supply chain?
Well, the term supply chain did not exist at that time. And it was basically called logistics in most of the organizations. Even in Nestle, up to the corporate level, it was called logistics. And the first time the term supply chain started to come was mid-90s. And you started hearing about that. We had one finance guy in Nestle who was a CFO who started talking about it to some extent in those days. But by 96, 97, the term has become much more commonly sort of understood. Having said that, I would say, which might surprise you and some listeners, that supply chain is still not very well understood in the corporate world. I still think it's a very young function, and people have different perceptions of what supply chain is. And many people in the industry tend to see it through the physical lens of the physical logistics about moving products from point A to point B. Whereas my view of supply chain, and I'm sure yours, Laura, I've seen a lot of your stuff, is much more evolved than that. So the term came around in mid-90s when the supply chain started to take some shape. So I became the very first supply chain manager in Nestle in India, South Asia region. So I had the honor and the challenge of setting up a supply chain division. And that supply chain division was formed by taking functions from marketing, sales, and finance. And to be very honest with you, it was not easy because it was made by taking, if I can use the word, the power of those different part functions and putting that under the supply chain umbrella. So I made the first supply chain division in Nestle India, and then I stayed in supply chain career for about 25 years at different levels, of course.
How did Nestle define regional global governance? I mean, were you able to just define what supply chain meant in India, or did you have direction from global Nestle?
I think supply chain was evolving in almost all the companies around the same time. So the corporate understanding of supply chain was very different in different organizations. And to be very honest, it was much more to the leaders to define how supply chain will look like and how would you define its role. I'll give you a practical example. When I established supply chain division in Nestle India, I formed a customer service division and we defined what customer service would look like. And I wanted to go beyond just the order processing side of customer service, is to be truly able to work with customers. But it was not easy for the organization to grasp that why would somebody outside the sales system would talk about customer collaboration and connecting with customers. So a lot of the work I had to do myself in terms of discussing with people, but sort of sharing that vision and bringing them on board. It wasn't easy. I have to be very honest. It was very difficult at that stage to define the role of supply chain because people could not conceive that why are we talking about this new, let's say, a setup which is connecting manufacturing, sales, finance, and customers. So because they were all used to individual functions, and supply chain therefore required a very different change of perspective from what I call from a vertical perspective to a very horizontal perspective. So a lot of it was done by individual leaders. There was some help from regions and corporates, but at the same time, they were also evolving. And again, I would say even till date, what supply chain is in different organizations and the degree of maturity is significantly dependent on how the supply chain leader defines supply chain and positions supply chain. Even today, the understanding of supply chain is completely different in different organizations. So it's up to the leaders to bring supply chain to a position where it is integral to business strategy, it is integral to business model, it is central to whatever the business does and not peripheral. So I still think there is a lot of work to be done, and leaders are in charge of that. I think we, people in supply chain, have the responsibility of bringing supply chain to the place it deserves.
So I'm going to get a little off track here, Vinay, but I think you'll allow me. How do you define supply chain?
That's a long topic of discussion. But essentially, I define supply chain to have the word define is not correct. How I look at supply chain is having a system view of things. And that system view of things includes looking at the entire business model, not only internally, which is sales, marketing, finance, etc., but externally connected with every other system, for example, suppliers, and customers, and your transporters and contract manufacturers, etc. In fact, beyond that, but then it gets too complex. To be able to have a system view, but having a view not only of the physical flows, but having a view of the information flow, the flow of the intelligence, the flow of cash and capital, and then optimizing the whole. So as an example, capital. If capital is not being invested by you, but it's being invested by your so-called business partners, it is still capital invested in your value chain. And since capital is being consumed in your value chain, it's going to be costing you something, whether in terms of depreciation or whatever it is. So to be able to have that overall view of the entire value chain and being able to optimize it, you can optimize it for cost, optimize for speed, optimize for capital, whatever you want to, or sustainability, resilience, but that's a system view of things. So in my view, it's not that a logistics person makes a great supply chain person or a manufacturing person makes a great supply chain person. It's not a functional skill. It is the ability to have an overall view and optimize the business on the defined dimensions, which is how I look at supply chain.
Okay, let's get back to the task at hand. Thank you for taking a little detour with me. What would you have told that 25-year-old Vinay, in Delhi, when you think back to that, whole orientation, what would you have told him?
What I would have told my younger self, also some of it I did actually, to be honest with you, I was sort of lucky in some aspects, is that first of all, look at the aspects of communication skills and the people skills. By communication skills, I don't mean the ability to communicate. I mean by that the ability to motivate, ability to engage, ability to inspire, ability to sell your ideas and your concepts. And though it's a combination of those people skills and communication skills as a whole package, which I think is very crucial for rising up in any system or for a corporate career. So that's one very important thing. The other thing is it's important to understand business. So I would say change functions in the early stages, because when you're young, it's easier for you to take risks and go across multiple functions. Even within supply chain, there are multiple functions. I was lucky enough by chance to have done sales, finance, and different kinds of things. But I think people should make that conscious choice of going into multiple functions, that actually gives you the real business perspective. Because without that, it's you will never get a good perspective of how sales system works, or how marketing guys think, or how manufacturing works. If possible, if you have a chance, take a risk and go into that roles. I would also say do the frontline roles. By frontline, I mean business still treats sales and marketing as frontline. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's how business treats it. But do those roles if you can, because they give you a very important perspective, and those are very important roles in businesses. So I would say be multifunctional and take risks in some of those areas, including finance, by the way. Finance is crucial for understanding business because it's the language of business at the end of the day. So I would advise even to invest time in learning in finance. In those days, digital technology was not a big deal, at least when I was 25. But yeah, we'll talk about it, how critical it is now. Certainly now it's a very, very different thing.
So let's roll that back to communication skills. Some people are born with the ability to motivate, the ability to write, the ability to listen. Some people aren't. How do the average students improve their communication skills to be better motivators, to inspire others? What would you say they should do?
Jump in, practice, first of all. Laura, I had very poor school education. You wouldn't believe I were to describe my school to you. When I entered Nestle, I was not in a position to speak English. I couldn't speak English because I only studied in vernacular. The idea is that you need to work and practice your communication. It's a skill which can be acquired. It is not one of those skills if you say God didn't give me and I cannot do it. You can get down to it and practice communication. Practice making presentations. Speak in front of a mirror if you like. Take every presentation opportunity. Speak up in meetings and make a plan to improve your communication skills. As far as people skills are concerned, that is something which comes depending on your values as well. By what I mean by that is that you need to genuinely be humble to learn in each conversation, to listen to what people are saying, understand their viewpoint. If somebody has a strong view on any particular area in business, try to understand where does she or he come from? What is the perspective behind that? Replace judgment with curiosity. So when you're truly oriented towards people and you are humble and you're learning, you start to get that skill, and rest of the communication you can practice. I think people need to realize that communication is a way of creating a conversation with somebody else. Sometimes you create engagement, sometimes you create motivation, sometimes you're selling something. So take every communication moment as a learning opportunity. My one line summary would be, it's a skill that can be acquired. It's a skill that can be practiced. I used to read newspapers in English aloud, sitting alone in a room, just to practice speaking English and listening to myself speaking English, because I could not speak English otherwise. Today, I do a reasonable job of it. I make tons of presentations and it all goes well. So it can be acquired, but it's a crucial skill, because one should not assume that hard work itself is going to take you high in your career, or the system is very fair and just. I mean, organizations are not Disneyland. It's not a place where everything is fair, everything is working on whatever should be the right thing. So you have to stand out, you have to network, you have to make your stakeholders network. I've seen presentations make or break careers, very honestly with you. I've seen that. So it's important to focus on communication skills. Very important.
I like your concept of replacing judgment with curiosity. Can you give me a practical example where maybe there's something that rubs you wrong, or you want to go to judgment and you replace it by curiosity? How does your mind remap that?
It happened very early in my career when we were making supply chain division. This is back in 98. Before that, I had done some projects and with sales and marketing people, etc. And I used to criticize salespeople a lot for poor forecasting, to be honest with you. That, oh, these guys don't know what they're talking about and what they're doing. So first of all, I myself had a stint in the sales organization for some time, so I got a better understanding. But it did occur to me during those interactions that if I keep on having a judgment that these guys don't do a good forecast, they don't know what the heck is happening in the marketplace, that's not going to work. It's not going to be productive by itself. It's important for me to understand where are they coming from and why does it not lead to what we're looking for. So I'll give you a very practical example. We shifted to in India, we sell through distributors largely. So we shifted to a model of mapping the sellout data of the distributors rather than just focusing on the primary sales we were making to the distributors. Because getting the sellout data of the distributor was a much closer signal to the actual demand than the primary sales you make to the distributors, because that's not a signal, that's not a demand signal. And even in those days, I'm talking about nearly 25 years ago, we were able to collect the secondary and the sellout data from distributors all over India, nearly 2,500 distributors at that time, to start making a demand plan which was sort of closer to the reality. So I think when you cross that judgment and that criticism and that whatever it is and start to get to what is the real issue, you often come closer to solutions. It's not always easy. We are human beings. We all always have our emotions and so on and so forth. But curiosity is, I think, is a very important value, particularly in today's world, to understand where are people coming from? Why do they say what they're saying?
Right.
I also, by the way, did a course, and I never forget one line from that course, Laura, which says that if you were born in that family and if you had lived that life, you would have said what this person has said just now. So everybody's coming from a particular background, from a particular context, and we need to try and understand that.
So put yourself in the shoes of the person to understand and be curious.
Be curious as far as possible.
Yeah. I think that's sage advice. Thank you. Did you have any failure in your career?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, fortunately, I've had very successful career, but I think I did have failures. My failures, I realized a couple of times in the crisis situation. There was one crisis situation where I thought that the so-called third-party logistics specialists know their job very well. I won't take the name here; it won't do good to them. It is a very big name in logistics, and we had a big crisis in one of our countries. And I thought, okay, these guys would know the details of the process, technology, regulations, etc., etc. But that was a wrong call, and the crisis evolved into a much bigger crisis because of that, and we had to spend several months resolving it. There are those lessons that you learn during the crisis time. Couple of times in my career, I stood for what I thought was right, but I did not do it, I would say, with the right kind of people skills. So there was one situation in one of my career stages where I had to oppose a decision which was made by the headquarters in Nestle and by some big guys, which was wrong. I proved it to be wrong, but I did not do it the right way. And in the process, it became very bitter. And I sort of people thought that it was not a great experience, even though the output was right. I learned my lessons about the fact that you also have to manage. Being right is not the only thing in life. The question is, how do you manage the communication process? How do you manage stakeholders? And being right is not always the approach you need to focus on. You need to be focused on how to be effective, not just be right.
And what would you have done differently to have been effective versus pushing right?
But just to be sensitive to how other people would feel, because the people involved here were very senior people, or they were several levels senior to me as well. I sort of survived that. I don't know how, but the fact is that I should have been more careful about how it is perceived. As an example, sometimes you may have something very different than your CEO to whom you're reporting in a and I've been on leadership teams for 25 years and sat in management teams for a long time. I've realized that sometimes it's better to go one to CEO's office and talk about how you feel differently rather than trying to say things in large meetings which are not going to be productive. I do not mean at all that you be silent. You express your viewpoint when it is important, but when it is very sensitive, it's important to be sensitive to the whole context and the whole group dynamics and go and have a one-to-one discussion. I should have done something like that to be more effective rather than being sort of too bold about it or being abrasive about it, is what I feel.
Well, unfortunately, I think today email really enables passive aggressive communication versus the direct one on one that you're talking about, right? So I
Yeah.
think a lot of times people don't have courage to have that one on one and they, you know, default to email and social media and, voicemail
Right.
versus looking somebody
Right.
in the eye. And I think
Yeah.
that, the meeting is not the place to have, that tense discussion or, email. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for your gift. Anything that you would like to leave, as people think about supply chain in the future, where part of a generation that were first and second generation supply chain pioneers, and people are retiring and leaving, and supply chains changing as we have the shifts in technology. Any last comments for that young student getting out of school?
My last comment is that I often give a quote, Laura, that supply chain is an idea whose time has come. I genuinely think that if supply chain leaders play the right role now, right moves with the right level of understanding of business and right level of courage, supply chain can truly come to the central place in business. Reason is very simple. Businesses need to deliver today top line growth, need to improve bottom line, need to deliver capital efficiency, resilience, agility, sustainability, digital. The only function, I don't like to use the word function for supply chain, but the only lens which can manage all these 6 and 7 variables simultaneously and optimize all of them simultaneously is supply chain lens. Any other functional lens is grossly insufficient to manage the challenges that we have today and that we will have, I think, for the next 10 to 20 years. And supply chain is in a golden position to manage these things, 6, 7 things simultaneously and optimize and take the business model forward. So supply chain needs to become very integral to the business model, but it will depend on how supply chain leaders position, communicate, and show the courage to be different. But the time is golden in terms of what supply chain can do for the next 10 to 20 years. And the very last thing I would say is that digital technologies, I don't mean the buzzwords, I mean the real digital technology is how the business is going to be done in the years ahead. So it's critical for professionals to get a good understanding of technology and be very proficient. I don't mean you become technical in terms of coding, but in terms of understanding how technology works and how you can refine your business models and your operating models with the help of technology. So critical to learn that and be digitally sort of proficient.
And what is real digital to you?
Digital for me, very simply speaking, I'm giving you a theoretical definition to begin with, is that whatever I dreamed as a supply chain person that I had is available today through technology. You wanted visibility. You wanted connection between different parts of supply chain. You want some predictive capabilities. You want some simulation capabilities. You want some prescriptive capabilities. Whatever I dreamt as a supply chain manager, I wish I had. I think a lot of that is starting to become available through digital technologies today. And that's what I mean by digital. I'm not talking about the core technical aspects. I'm talking about the capabilities which digital technologies are bringing today, which are very, very critical for running a good supply chain. So you have that available. And in the next 3 to 5 years, they will evolve even more. But buying technology randomly and hoping that it's going to work, that's disastrous. That's not going to work. You need a technology strategy which is linked with the business model and with the business strategy.
So let me see if I can summarize what I heard. I think this was a great conversation. You started out talking about the importance to understand business and to learn communication skills. And your definition of communication skills were more around inspiring, motivating, and learning. You talked about replacing judgment with curiosity and the ability to have face-to-face communication and to be able to not just be right, but to be effective. And you talked about continuous learning around the path for digital and to really understand supply chain as a system and systems thinking. Is there anything else that you would add to that summary?
No, I think it's a good summary, and I'm quite astonished at your powers of memory and remembering all this stuff in the conversation.
Well, one of the things you get as 20 years of an industry analyst is active listening, pattern recognition and active listening.
That's true.
Well, thank you for joining the program today and being a great supply chain leader. All the best in your days of, I think you're really doing a marvelous job of trying to bring the wisdom of leading an organization to speaking and facilitation and contributing to the supply chain in a different way. So congratulations. Thanks for the time to join the show today.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye now.